Hello and welcome. This is Yuri Leitch, comes from Glastonbury. He's a dowser, energy worker, and an author. He's also a fantastic artist. So he's well worth looking up. His art too. He paints boron drums and so forth. And we've invited him just to talk to us about earth energy, specifically in Glastonbury, because we have a conference in Glastonbury in a few weeks' time. And I had asked him to talk to us about his connection with the King of the Fairy, Gwyn, which he's written a number of books about, and also sort of the dragon energies and the dragon lines, spirituality. So, welcome, Yuri. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, well, you've said pretty much everything about me. I am an artist and a kind of historian, and I've been involved since I'm 55, and I've been involved with something called psychic questing since I was about 20. Or I was reading books about it when I was 14. But simplistically, psychic questing is a way of exploring history and sacred landscapes. And the psychic bit is just empathy, really, but empathy that leads on to clairvoyance, or seeing things or hearing things or having significant dreams. So it's a way of communicating with the land, and also the great memory, that the land remembers everything that has happened. So you can go to places and you can tune in, you can connect. So every place has its story to tell. How that works, it's many layered, of course. Glastonbury, for the dragon energies, there has been known about since the 1930s, at least, although it wasn't really written about until the 1960s. But there is a great big alignment of significant hilltops that have churches on them dedicated to the Archangel Michael. And that line of Michael hilltops runs from St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall through various places like Roach Rock and Brent Tor on Dartmoor, and Borough Mump to Glastonbury Tor. And all these places have the Michael Church. And that line carries on through Glastonbury Tor, onwards through the Stones of Avebury, all the way to the Norfolk coast. So this alignment of Michael churches and ancient hills and stone circles has been called the Michael line. But the image of the Archangel Michael is usually him pinning down with a spear a dragon or a big serpent. So on one level it's meant to be defeating the devil, but equally, like acupuncture with needles, it's pinning down the natural energies of the land, which you call dragon energies or earth energies, which are often seen as serpentine in their nature. So on the one hand, there's medieval Michael churches pinning down earth energies. On the other hand, this alignment of hilltops and stone circles is far, far older than the Michael churches, And the rather fascinating thing is that the Michael line, which is also known as the Great Dragon line, if you go to the top of Glastonbury Tor, there's a metal disc fixed into the concrete. I don't know what it's called, but it's a big circular metal disc, and it points to north, south, east, and west, and different landmarks that you can see to the north, south, east, and west. And running through the metal disc, which has been there, I think, since the 1980s, it shows this Michael line, and it actually calls it the Great Dragon line. So that's been marked out on Glastonbury Tor since the 1980s, this Great Dragon line. But apart from being an amazing line across the land, it does something rather incredible. It points to the sunrise at Beltane, and it also points to the sunrise at Lunasa, and it points to the sunset of Imbolc and Samhain. So calling it the Michael line because of the Michael churches, it's simply looking at the medieval placement of churches on what were already very sacred hilltops. It's well known and well understood that Christianity put its churches on the sites of pagan sanctuary, pagan shrines, and pagan temples, and so on. So, who was there before Michael? Well, before in Britain, before there was Christianity, there was the Romans, and the Romans would have put temples to Apollo or Helios, gods of light, maybe Mercury, but they would only be copying what the Celts had already done. And so there was a book that came out, I think, around about 1910 by a chap called Evans Wentz, and it was the book about fairy lore in Celtic. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the Celtic tales of the secret Commonwealth.
that's right. Yeah, and in there he talks about the Michael places, and he doesn't name any deity by name, but he says that the Michael churches replaced the Celtic god of light, whoever the Celtic god of light was. I think the best candidate for that would be Lu or Lugus, but it could have been Belly or something, Bell. So either way, the so-called Michael line or dragon line points to sunrise at Beltane for Bell, Bellymore, but it also points to sunrise at Lunasa. So that's Lu. So you could see it as a Lu line, and all the Michael churches, whatever you want to call him, the Celtic god of light. Simplistically, I see that as what the Archangel Michael represents to Christians, which is the power of light overcoming the forces of darkness. So whether you see it as the Archangel Michael or Mithras for the Romans or Apollo or Lu or Lugus, it's always the same thing. It's a triumphant Lord of light overcoming the forces of darkness. And that's what this alignment of sites seems to be singing about through one culture and another, Celtic, Roman, and Christian.
It's fascinating that you use the term singing, Yuri. The energy lines, they're also called communication lines by some, that they were saying that people could be communicating down these lines, that you can actually use these energy lines for specific purposes. What are your thoughts with regards to that?
Yes, I think there are multiple things, and it's to do with, I hate the word, I really hate the word, but it's to do with energy, which you could call chi or life force or whatever, but it very much goes where people's intention tells it to go. So it's kind of like energy of an intention, I suppose. But on the one hand, there is a history with the Romans, at least, and possibly the Celts, using hilltops to send messages fire beacon to fire beacon. And that carried on right up until the time of Elizabeth I, when the Spanish Armada arrived into the English Channel. They could get a message from Cornwall to London in 15 minutes with these fire beacons. So those, it was well established across Europe with Roman hilltops using smoke and fire. It's not just a Native American thing, smoke signals. So there is then a line of communication running across the country. But this line of communication points to those Celtic fire festivals, which is just uncanny and fascinating. And then, having lived in Glastonbury, I knew one lady in particular who could see spirits, and she would often describe spirits passing through people's houses, following these lines to the tour, and that I know a lot of people now just see them as spirit paths, that they are, whether it's the ghosts of dead people, or whether it's the fairy or the fae, that they are lines of energy across the land. Now, that in modern earth mysteries theories, there is plasma which comes from tectonic plates and movements below the earth, and they're kind of like a electrostatic energy that can come out of the ground as orbs of light, or what have you. But plasma is also believed to hold consciousness. It can respond to human beings and communicate. So, I mean, it's not really explaining anything other than trying to grasp at straws to explain that the land itself is conscious. And then we're getting into a big rabbit hole. But so back to the psychic questing, where you go somewhere and tune into the great memory of a place. Somehow every part of the land, every waterfall, every lake, every pool, every hill, every valley holds the memory of all that has happened there. But equally, it's conscious itself. And then that's expressed to people, individual people encountering fairies or gods and goddesses or leprechauns or banshees or white lady ghosts or black dogs or anything, that the land is communicating with the psyche, the dreaming part of individuals through their pineal glands. So one person might see a white lady or a black dog, and it's their reaction to that place. And another person standing right next to them might not see a black dog or a white lady, because their pineal gland is just not communicating. They're not tuned in. So is it there or is it not there? Well, it's right now in the room where I'm sitting. It's just a bedroom in Guernsey, but there are about 30 different conversations going on Radio 1, Radio 2, BBC Radio 4, and I can't hear any of them. But if I had a radio, I could play all 40 radio stations at the same time, and it would be a monstrous noise. But the point is that things are there if you can tune into them, and they're not there if you don't try and tune into them. So working on landscape, seeing spirits of the land are there for some people and are not there for other people, depending on the empathy and frequency of the person.
That's fascinating, Yuri. I sort of taken by sort of your thoughts there. We were having a conversation just prior to this about the likes of sacred sites and sort of people connecting their spirituality. Not everybody is connecting into their spiritual possibility, that they're what they could be connecting to. But also, more than that, is we were having conversations with other people sort of on spirit within the land, regarding portals. Whenever you're talking about the different conversations on some of these different sites, what we keep hearing over and over again is that some of these portals some of them are fairy portals, but actually the same portals are also connected to the likes of UFO. We were having conversations about Sligo. Sligo has an awful lot of connections with regards to the she and the tripping she and the gentry. But there's an awful lot of sort of things that are happening there, sort of spiritually. But similarly, it's in exactly the same locations. People that are into UFOs rather than the fairy are seeing UFOs, and they're seeing using exactly the same portals. And it's kind of interesting. Sort of, are we dealing with the same person, or are they just using the same highway? I mean, what are your thoughts about this, Yuri?
Yes, yeah, it's all one thing in a way. First of all, I would break it down into two types of, for want of a better word, presences. The first type would be the spirit presences that are fixed to that location. So that's kind of the shamanic idea of animism, that everything has a spirit. So every tree and bush and flower in that location is fixed to that location. It can't go off, a tree can't go for a walk, it's living in that location potentially century after century after century. And so it's fixed consciousness of that location. So that's one aspect to the presence of a place, that every living thing in that place has consciousness and awareness. Trees, tree spirits, dryads, fairy spirits of plants, and so on. And then there's spirits that are not fixed to a specific location, spirits that come and go, that are free to travel around the world or even between this world and other worlds. So straight away, I've divided it into two, that there's fixed spirits to a location, and then there's traffic, spirits coming and going. And portal is as good a word as any other. And I think that some places, like you mentioned, Sligo and Glastonbury, and lots of other places that we could call places of power, where the energies are more dynamic than other places, lend themselves to being portals or power centers where there's a lot of coming and going. But equally, recently was exploring the pine trees and the mythology of pine trees, and there was one writer in the 1970s writing about UFOs, and he made a very simple observation. His name was Tony Wedd, Tony Wedd, and his simple observation was that most UFO sightings happened over hilltops that had pine trees on them. And that really stuck in my head. What would it be about pine trees that would connect with UFOs as a landscape phenomena more than any other? And there's a theory that although they're fixed to a location, they can't go for a walk. The pine trees are there, rooted into the ground. For centuries, they are generating life force. They are generating energy, and the energy unique to the pine tree, for whatever reason, is helpful to the comings and goings of UFOs. And that's quite interesting because in the ancient world, Mesopotamia, the cedar trees, the cedars of Lebanon, were known as the abode of the gods. So why would the cedars of Lebanon be the abode of the gods, unless it was to do with the energies that those cedar trees were producing, facilitating traffic coming and going from a portal in some way? It's really interesting.
It is. It's fascinating. Just to add into that, because I was having a great conversation with Deborah Hatswell from the BBR. We were having a random discussion about moss, because I've always just been drawn to moss throughout my life. I just love it, you know. So, and it's very big in the likes of sort of China, you know, and sort of in their garden design. But apparently in Norway, there's a tradition that moss is connected to the fairy, that sort of that they would become more visible, sort of in a mossy kind of a landscape. And she had said that she did an experiment with moss where her mobile phone had died and there was no reception, but she put her mobile phone on top of moss and suddenly it was drawing. It actually drawed electricity and it was able to draw the signal. So we were sort of thinking that it was the moss had some sort of electronic signal capabilities, that it was the moss was actually the attractant in that particular case. And the Sligo area is well known for its dampness, you know, so it has plenty of moss out there. So even Glastonbury, actually, there's certain the areas that we talk about, the likes of sort of the Chalice Well and in round by the White Springs. Again, it's fairly mossy too. It's kind of interesting.
Yep, and there was a famous alchemist in England called Dr. John Dee, and his assistant scryer was a chap called Edward Kelly. And Edward Kelly wrote a book, I forget what it was called. It was something like the terrestrial astronomy or something. But the basic idea was that they were looking at the landscape in terms of alchemy and in terms of mineral. So if there was gold in those hills, they were solar. And if there was silver in these hills, they were lunar. Or if there was copper in a landscape, it was Venus related. Or if there was iron, that landscape was related to Mars. But it's just another idea that whilst trees can generate energy, depending on what kind of landscape they're in, there's also gold, silver, copper, or iron adding to the mix. So, you know, different counties can have very different feelings because of the stones and the minerals involved in the land, as well as the shrubs and trees and plants that are growing on that land.
Just further on from that, it was that you were talking about alchemists, similar to Dr. Dee. I think they were involved too, but we had Boyle here in Ireland. So he was big into alchemy too. There was a big trait in sort of the ghoulish collection of bones from graveyards. But one of the things that they used to use was the moss that was growing on the skulls of bones, and that was one of their alchemical materials that they used. I mean, sort of Kelly was famous for his alchemy creation of gold because of the materials that were taken from a grave in Glastonbury Cathedral, from what I gather.
No, it's interesting. I guess the moss would be absorbing all sorts of energies from that environment as well, so that the moss is carrying that. And
and also with an electrical charge. So it is.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's sort of our eyes are being open to all of these things. We were discussing the likes of Merlin, and it sort of, and also please tell us about your connection. You wrote a fantastic book. In fact, you wrote the same book, and you elaborated on it to do with Gwyn, the king of the fairies, sort of over in England.
So when I eventually moved to Glastonbury in 2001. I was 33, but I'd been fascinated by Glastonbury Tor since I was 14. So I ended up moving there and living there. And I went up the Tor, and I made an oath to myself and to the Tor to learn everything that I could about it. And ultimately, that's what ended up being my book, Gwyn. Gwyn is the local Celtic deity celebrated at Glastonbury Tor. his full title is Gwyn ap Neath, but Gwyn is his first name. Gwyn ap Neath just means Gwyn, the son of Neath. But anyway, so my first book was trying to figure out everything I could about Gwyn. And then that was in 2007, that was published. And then in 2021, I expanded it, and it's a massive book now. It's over 750 pages of bardic and druidic star lore and mystery traditions and stuff. But it was all born of my research into Gwyn ap Neath. Now, one of the main things that really hooked me at the beginning was I was already aware of the Michael line, the Great Dragon line, and that it pointed to sunrise at Beltane. That was kind of in my head just as a basic kind of Earth mysteries phenomena. But being in Glastonbury and looking at what legends there were in Glastonbury, well, the main ones are what I call super legends. The two super legends are the supposed grave of King Arthur and all of the legends around that. And then the other one is the idea that Joseph of Arimathea, uncle of Jesus, came to Glastonbury and planted his staff in Weary Hill and retired and settled in Glastonbury. And theoretically, his nephew Jesus came with him. So they're the two big super legends, but they tell you nothing at all about Glastonbury Tor. So then the only legend in Glastonbury that related to the Tor itself was a rather obscure late medieval legend about a king of the fairies, and this king of the fairies was Gwyn ap Neath. So apparently Gwyn ap Neath lived in Glastonbury Tor or lived on top of the Tor, depending on the stories you read. So I looked into Gwyn ap Neath, and one of the first things I found, which just put a shiver down my back, was that in Welsh mythology, Gwyn ap Neath has a battle every Beltane, year after year, every Beltane, with a strange character called Gwythyr ap Gridle. Basically, it's the Winter King and the Summer King having a battle every Beltane. And Gwyn ap Neath, the King of the Fairies, is the Winter King. But here's the magic then. This obscure Welsh legend talked about Gwyn having a battle every Beltane. And the Great Dragon line, the Michael line, points to sunrise at Beltane. So that's two things then about Glastonbury Tor, Dragon Line and Gwyn ap Neath singing a song about Beltane, whereas the super legends of King Arthur and Joseph of Arimathea say nothing about the Tor or Beltane. So I kind of pushed those aside as medieval romances and just delved into understanding what I could about Gwyn ap Neath. Now, the term fairy is a late medieval word, and in Welsh, there's a poem where he describes himself, and in English it says, "Fairy I am called," but that's a late English translation. The word in Welsh is hud, H-U-D, hud. And it means kind of fairy in the very vague sense, in that it means the paranormal, the enchanted, the magical. It doesn't mean little Tinkerbell fairies. It means fairy as in fairy tale, as a tale of enchantment, a tale of magic, a tale of mystery. So when he says fairy I am called, in modern terminology, it would be more like saying, I am very paranormal. I am of the other world. I am the Twilight Zone, that kind of thing, rather than him being a tiny king of the fairies. It's not really that at all. He's the Celtic god of the other world and all of the paranormal frequencies of that other world. So other research into Gwyn also understood that he was represented in the night sky as what we call the constellation of Orion, which throughout Northern Europe, the constellation of Orion relates to the winter months. It dominates the night sky around winter solstice and so on. And there's a whole lot of star lore into the expansion of Gwyn. But simplistically, seeing Orion the Hunter as the Winter Hunter or the Winter King, the constellation of the Winter King, if you're in Glastonbury town centre by the monument, the medieval monument at the centre, or more importantly, in my opinion, if you're at the ancient site of the Iron Age Celtic lake village outside of Glastonbury, during the winter months, the constellation of the Winter Hunter comes out of Glastonbury Tor and goes hunting across the night sky. So that story in the night sky is told night after night after night during the winter time, and it makes the Tor the home or the abode of the Winter King, Gwyn ap Neath, who has his battle every Beltane with the Summer King. And because it's a seasonal battle, the Summer King has to win. The Summer King always wins. And so the Winter King is defeated or goes below the horizon until the following autumn. And then he returns at Samhain and is triumphant against the Summer King. The Summer King is defeated. And then you're in the season of the Winter King again. So all of that's played out in Glastonbury Tor. And I had those ideas in my mind when I wrote my first book about Gwyn in 2007. The front cover actually depicts a silhouette of Glastonbury Tor with the constellation of Orion coming out of it. And inside the book, I talk about the Beltane alignment of the dragon line. I also, at the same time, another Glastonbury writer called Nicholas Mann had made an amazing discovery. And it was this, that from a certain hill in Glastonbury called St. Edmund's Hill, where there seems to be a kind of mound, or it looks a bit like a barrow mound or a tump. It's uncertain what it is. It's never had proper archaeology done. But there's a mound on a hill. And from that mound, at winter solstice, the sun can be seen to roll up the side of Glastonbury Tor to the very top of the Tor. So there's more things there then. You've got the dragon line pointing to the Beltane sunrise, and you've got Gwyn ap Neath being the Winter King having a Beltane battle. You've also got the Tor being the home of the Winter King, because the constellation of the Winter Hunter comes out of it every night during the winter months. And on top of that, at winter solstice, the sun rolls up the side of the Winter King's hill. And there was, in Roman times, a pagan temple on top of the Tor, where the tower of the church now stands. And that winter solstice sun would have rolled into the pagan temple on top of Glastonbury Tor.
It's such a magical ceremonial landscape, Yuri. I mean, sort of in my own experience, sort of spending time there, we would have conversations. I think at one time there was there's a manhole. There was a manhole at the top of the Tor, because they said that the Tor was hollow, and apparently the Druids used to go down and have used to have their ceremonies inside the tower from the top in the hollow places. That's been concreted over. Whenever we used to go with RJ Stewart back a number of years ago, and he would do these meditations with regards to the red and the white dragon, which correlated to the white springs and the red springs at the tower, the two different sort of sources of water, and how this correlated with sort of dragon energies. And we would sort of be working with the dragon. Now, even the Glastonbury are fantastic when it comes to their urban sort of street fairs, where they have the red and the white dragon come and they travel up to the tower at Beltane, so and also at Lunasa as well.
Yeah, that's the modern Glastonbury, definitely. But the idea of gods and goddesses, it's just Gwyn is relevant to the tour, but there's goddesses in hills as well. I mean, that's well attested in Ireland too, where a lot of the ancient barrows are called she mounds, that the she or the spirits live inside those hills, that it's not just spirits of the dead that are buried there. But even around the British Isles, there's many places where King Arthur and his knights are meant to be sleeping inside of a hill and will return. That's told in Ireland too, about Finn McCool and the Fianna sleeping in the hills and their return when they're needed. But wherever a settlement was, if a tribe lived in that area year after year, they would get to know their surrounding hills, and out of those surrounding hills would rise different constellations of stars throughout the year, and it would repeat each year. So every year that group of stars would come out of that hill, and that group of stars would come out of that hill. So the constellations, often seen as gods and goddesses in the ancient world, each god and goddess star constellation would correspond with a different hill. So symbolically, they live in that hill because they come and go from that hill, literally. So the idea of hollow hills is a really important one, but it actually relates to the spirit world star realm thing of gods and goddesses. I was involved in Glastonbury in 2016 with the beginning of the Glastonbury Dragons, which are two massive dragons that I think they're 50 meters long, each one. But each dragon head is about 7 foot long, and the long body is about 50 meters. And it takes about 20 people to animate each dragon. So you need to get both dragons, a red dragon and a white dragon, going at Beltane. You need about 50 volunteers to animate them. And then they go up the Tor, they go up the high street in Glastonbury to the Tor and stuff. When we organised the Glastonbury Dragons, the inspiration for it was actually the Great Dragon line that goes from St. Michael's Mount through Glastonbury Tor and points to the Beltane sunrise. In the 1980s, there were two dowsers, Paul Broadhurst and Hamish Miller, and they dowsed the Michael line, Great Dragon line, and they found two serpentine energies intertwining like snakes running up and down the line. One was considered masculine and called Michael, and it favoured going to the hilltops. And the other was considered feminine, and it was called Mary, and it favoured going down into the valleys and rivers and streams and churches that were dedicated to the Virgin Mary. So there was this basic male and female snakes intertwining all along the dragon line. So a bit like the caduceus magical wand of the god Mercury, came to see these two serpents as yin and yang, as male and female, and then remembering the Merlin lore of the red dragon and the white dragon, that was very much the inspiration for the red and white dragons of Glastonbury, as well as the red spring and the white spring, and as well as the Beltane alignment of the dragon line, that it all organically grew together. And it's been going now every Beltane and every Samhain since 2016. So it's a newish thing, but it's based on old folklore. We were trying to create for Glastonbury something to celebrate every year, a bit like Padstow has its Obios in Cornwall, and lots of places have Morris dancing. So we wanted to celebrate Beltane in some way at Glastonbury, because Glastonbury tour with Gwyn up Neath is significant to Beltane. Also, the Gwyn battle every Beltane between Winter King and Summer King, that's the red dragon and the white dragon. So the white dragon is the Winter King's dragon, it represents the winter time, and the red dragon is the Summer King's dragon, represents the summertime. So every Beltane, the red dragon of the Summer King has to win for the summer, and then every Samhain, the white dragon of the Winter King has to win for the winter. So that's now the seasonal clock in Glastonbury, and the change of winter to summer, summer to winter. That works on a more esoteric level as well, and it's this. It's kind of backed up with understanding how dreams work and how shamanic journeying works. But simplistically, the 6 months of summer correspond esoterically with being wide awake and being in the outer world. And the 6 months of winter correspond with being asleep and the dreaming world. So, and this is backed up in the Mabinogi and lots of other Celtic stories, this interplay between this world and the other world. So Gwyn, as the Winter King, is also the king of the other world, the surreal, dreaming world, the world of dreams and visions, the inner world. In Welsh, that's known as Annwn, which it just means the inner world. It's the inner visioning world, the place of inspiration for all poets and songwriters and artists. That is the place of visions that a shaman would go to and come back from. So that's the realm of fairy, or that's the realm of Gwyn up Neath. So rather than this minuscule, tiny, little king of the fairies, it's more like the lord of the other world, the lord of the unseen world.
There's a lot to unpack there. I love the stories about sort of Finn McCool sort of sleeping until when needed. It kind of echoes what was it Robert Anton Wilson had stated in his Liminatus sort of trilogy. I think he played on that particular legend with his army under the waters in sort of the mainland Europe. Sort of, I don't know whether they're familiar with that, but the armies were woken, I suppose, Armageddon. Yeah, it's also to do with spiritual connection with the land. We just to touch back on another thing that we had mentioned there with regards to spiritual connection. What do you think about people's apparent loss of connection with the spirit within the land?
Yeah, I think there's been that disconnection has come about for a number of various causes that have created it.
Yeah, what can we do about it, as opposed to sort of saying, right, okay, that it's lost. I don't want to see that it's being lost, but I mean, looking at we'd mentioned that there was there'd been a number of injuries to some of our heritage monuments here in Ireland, and was it some people had maybe etched things into our thousands of year old, very sacred structures. How can we sort of reconnect people to the importance of the legends within the land, and that they're needed to protect these ancient monuments that have sat there for 3, 4, 5,000 years, maybe older?
How to do that? How to make people reconnect? How do you make people love the land? It's so difficult. It's a thing of being in the heart and feeling connected to a place. And for many different reasons, people are disconnected. They're disconnected from the other world. They're disconnected from the spirit world. And they consider themselves very educated and very rational and so on. But the truth is that we're dreaming creatures, and that's how we find connection and wholesomeness. For instance, unless you're on serious medication, everybody dreams 4 times a night, whether you remember your dreams or not. And a study was done some years ago in one of the universities when they looked into dream deprivation. And cutting a long story short, but if you have your dreamings interrupted for 5 nights, you start to hallucinate in the normal world, in consensus reality. In the wide awake world, you will start to hallucinate if you haven't had 5 nights decent sleep. And the scary thing is, if you haven't slept properly for 7 or 8 nights, in the real wide awake world, you cannot tell hallucination from reality. And that's psychotic behavior. So all of us, everybody on the planet, is just 7 nights sleep deprivation away from psychosis. So the conclusion with that is our well-being, our mental well-being, our emotional and spiritual well-being needs to tap into the dreams. If we don't have a healthy rhythm with dreaming, we will start to hallucinate. The dreams will punch their way into our normality, and they will be seen. They can't be avoided. And the thing is then to surrender to that what we are, all of us, is we are dreaming beings. Dreaming is what we do for at least, 8 hours every 24 hours. We are meant to be dreaming. And so whether it's shamanic work, magical work, or going to ancient sites or interacting with a sacred landscape, when you're doing that, you're dreaming with the land. And that's how you communicate with the memory of the land and the spirits of the land. That what we call dreams are the communications of consciousness between one source and another, and so the bridge to that conscious dreaming is the imagination. And most people are disconnected from even using their imagination. They might have had an invisible friend in their childhood, and their parents would say, oh, it's just your imagination, or whatever. That somehow the imagination is diminished into something unworthy, something that's not grounded in reality. And yet, it's the bridge, it's the way of connecting with the spirit world. The spirit world only talks to us through our dreamings and our imaginings. So if you're disconnected from your imagination and you don't trust your imagination, you're on your own. You're divorced from the spirit world, you're divorced from the other world. The people that are a bit more connected are people that use their imagination. That's going to be story writers and songwriters and poets and artists, that they use their imagination more than most people, probably on a daily basis. So it's easier for them to envision things. But a lot of people like the idea of the paranormal, but don't want to see a ghost, or they don't even believe in ghosts, but they don't want to see one. There's a paradox there, a contradiction. And they don't trust their imagination. They're frightened of insanity. And that's understandable. Fear is understandable. But the truth is, we are dreaming beings. And if our dreams are interrupted, we will begin to hallucinate. So surely the intelligent thing to do is to explore the dream world, or explore the other world. And that's the world of the fairy of Gwyn.
That's beautiful. That is actually stunning, Yuri. That's really beautiful. It's it kind of makes me feel that whenever you're describing that actually by dreaming with the land, that we're nourishing the land at the same time. It's our interaction, and it kind of also explains, and it gives a greater gravitas to people actually acting out the likes of the legends, like you're talking about the dragons, like sort of, I mean, we're talking about Sligo and Carramore and Carrowkeel, and actually if people are acting those out in the likes of art and dance and music, then actually that, again, that all feeds into I'm sort of seeing it differently. I'm seeing it as nourishing the land because of that absolutely delicious explanation. That was absolutely gorgeous. Thank you so much for that, Yuri.
No, but what you just said about nourishing the land is right as well. It's loving the land, and if the land is healthy, then the people are healthy, and vice versa. You know, if the land is sick, then the people are sick as well. So, yeah, devotional interaction with and celebration with the land. So celebrating the festivals like Imbolc and Beltane and the Samhain and so on, or just full moons, or any time, just getting together and dancing in love and love of the land, and healing the land, and feeling connected with it. You know, that it's not just mud and sticks. You know, that it's the great mother, and we're all walking on her and dancing on her. And if we could allow ourselves, we could talk to her as well.
Yeah, well, we're learning that that it's not just mud and sticks. I mean, the area that I'm talking about with regards to the sort of the She, the Sid Mounds, and so forth in Sligo, it just so happened that at one point of the area, the actual soil has capabilities and powers that there's like a long legend of this particular soil. There's soil from a certain minister's grave in some sort of church in around that particular area, and people take a bit of the soil and take it home and put it in under their pillow if they're unwell, and it seems to heal them. And
Yeah.
but they're told that they have to take the soil back, or else they'll get sick again. So, but apparently they took the soil off and they tested it, and it actually, you know, those that superbug, the flesh-eating superbug, it actually had microbes in it that would attack and kill the superbug. You know. So it's yeah, we're finding that again, these materials are sentient. And the more we had a great conversation with Miles Johnson about sort of sentience within the land, and sort of specific sort of material types, and these areas were connected to great visionaries, like we were talking about the sentience in the landscape, in a place where a guy called A.E. Russell grew up. You know, sort of he was the great mystic visionary. You know, so it impacts a lot of people. Sort of when we were sort of seeing all the different things that seems to be happening in those areas with the likes of sort of the energies in the soils, like the likes of BR investigations, again again, is it Deborah? She was able to pick up that there was a lot of Bigfoot sightings in Northern Ireland, in around these areas. So it's again using these portals, sort of. But it's just the more we look into these things, the more magical that we see that the landscape really is, and we kind of see that we're only on one channel. But I mean, there's, as she said, there's other channels that are there, other kind of liminal species that only whenever we tune in that we might be able to capture some of this magic. Yuri, would you like to sort of maybe take us through to go and meet the King and the Fairies in a bit of a very short meditation?
Okay then, right now? Okay. What I would just say, I'll just talk us through a minute or two of breathing. That will actually help me change my brain frequency a bit. So what I do when I'm doing meditations with people, primarily just use slow breathing to relax. And the idea is you're trying to get your brain towards sleep, because you're looking for imagery, you're looking for daydreams. So that means getting from the beta waves to the alpha waves and to the theta waves, and just slowing the brain down so that you can dream a little bit whilst you're awake. So what I do is first I just exhale, and then to your own rhythm, breathe in slowly. And then breathe out slowly. And you're using the breath to slow down, to relax. Whenever you breathe in, new energy comes up your spinal cord and gently stimulates your pineal gland. And more important than that is when you breathe out slowly, you relax. You let the exhale relax your shoulders, relax your neck, relax your chest. Just use the exhale to relax. So breathing in gives you new energy, invigorates you. But it's the exhale that takes us towards sleeping, takes us towards dreaming, so that we can get some imagery. So I'll just do one more breath. So breathing in slowly, and then breathing out slowly to relax, to get close to dreaming. Now I'll talk us through a visualization, but keep breathing slowly. The slower you can breathe, the better, because you want to get close to the realm of dreams. So in Somerset, there is Glastonbury Tor. It's 500 feet above the sea level. It's not a mountain, but in the Somerset levels, it rises like a pyramid, dominating the area, the sacred hill. And at the base of the sacred hill is the White Spring and the Chalice Well Red Spring. Sacred alchemy, the red and white waters. Trusting that you have been there before, or at least seen a photograph. In your mind's eye, I want you to start the approach going up Glastonbury Tor, but we're not going to the top. So behind the White Spring is a fair field. The fair field now has a ring of apple trees planted just in the last year or so. Sacred circle of apple trees for Avalon. And from the apple tree fair field, we start going up the Tor, the first few steps. But we're only going to go about a third of the way up. And it's twilight now. It's not dark, it's not nighttime. but the sun has set. And about a third of the way up, we're going to walk around to the right, which is actually the south side of Glastonbury Tor. So going around to the south side of Glastonbury Tor, about a third of the way up, we're going to come to a secret place. You can go there in the real world. It really exists. It's known as the Egg Stone. There's a big boulder stone called the Egg Stone. And next to the Egg Stone, there is a hawthorn tree. This Egg Stone and hawthorn tree are the secret, esoteric, ethereal entrance into the Tor. It can only be entered by one's imagination. But we're not entering. We're just going to wait by the entrance, breathing slowly in the twilight, near the hawthorn tree and the Egg Stone. And as we breathe slowly, we can feel that the Tor is alive, and it's pulsing with a heartbeat, a giant dragon heartbeat. As the twilight gets darker, we wrap up warm in blankets and cloaks, and the stars begin to appear. And then there is a loud noise of many horses and riders approaching from inside the Tor. And by the Egg Stone, an opening appears. Like a cave entrance has just suddenly appeared by the Egg Stone and hawthorn tree. And the silhouette of figures starts to come forth, riding horses out of Glastonbury Tor. Following the horses are dogs, running and chasing. And the horses and their riders and their hounds are insubstantial. They're not solid, they're ethereal. And they ride off into the sky. And they're flowing out of the Tor, horse rider after horse rider, maybe 20 horses, 30 horses. And as the wild hunt leaves Glastonbury Tor, the cave entrance shuts closed. And we look into the night sky, and the stars are sparkling, and the horses and riders and hounds are galloping through the heavens. This happens every night throughout the winter time. We sit quietly by the Egg Stone and the hawthorn. And 3 figures appear. They are cloaked in grey. Their faces are hidden. And they feel feminine. 3 ladies cloaked in grey are friendly, are happy to see you. They represent the goddess of the land, the divine feminine of the land, that which the wild hunt protects, protecting the goddess of the land. We can call her Nematona. It's just the title, it just means she of the sacred grove. Glastonbury was a sacred island, still is a sacred island. And with those that can see and those that can feel, it remains a sanctuary. It's a very powerful sanctuary entrance to the other world. The wild hunters protect, their guardian spirits protecting those who have died, protecting them on their journey to the spirit world. This is sacred ground. Here on the south side of the Tor, with the eggstone and the hawthorn, and the triple goddess of the sacred grove, feel the connection in your heart. From this heart chakra of the world, one of many, be connected to the spirit world and know that wherever you go, there is always spirit. The land is alive. Like a giant cobweb, every hill is connected to the stars. Every lake and river is connected to the goddess. And we are all part of that one living thing. And we are eternal. The triple goddess fades away. Someone arrives with a torch to lead us back in the dark, back from the Tor to the fair fields where there's a circle of apple trees. From the fair field back to the white spring and the red spring. And the real world with traffic going by. Clench your fists, squeeze your toes, breathe in deeply. Be alive, be wide awake here and now. Talking about things you can't prove to anybody, but as an artist, the other world and the dreaming world is reality to me, and as it is to lots of magical pagan folk, you know. Yeah. I think in the modern world, because of Samhain's proximity to Halloween and everything, that the wild hunts become a thing of spectral hellhounds, and it's a scary, nightmarish thing. But I think back in Celtic times, the hunters were more like Finn McCool in the Fianna, that they were protectors of the land, that they were protectors of the people. So I see it in a more kind of noble, Archangel Michael kind of protecting everybody kind of thing.
I think there's a very famous tapestry. I think it's done by an artist called Thompson, and it's meant to be held in the Scottish Parliament. I mean, but it's to do with the wild hunt. And again, it's all it's gold brocade. It's absolutely gorgeous. But that's what it's called. It's called the wild hunt. You know, for their tradition. But it's what you're describing. You know, it's a ceremonial kind of position. I mean, we have with the wild hunt in Ireland. I mean, there's a wild hunt around the in around sort of the Shannon region, sort of East Clare, and it would be connected to also the Brian Merriman's Midnight Court, sort of where the young men of the area would be hunted by the women, so there was
Yeah.
all kinds but again, that brings more humor into the whole thing. But that whole area, traveling all the way up the Shannon, up to the likes of again Sligo, again Drumahair, you would have that wild hunt kind of a legend, of sort of the horses running. We had the Brian Fitzgerald. He's a TV personality. He's done an awful lot of TV programs, and he would talk about a wild hunt, but in the May time in the Meath area, but he was saying that it was actually leprechauns, sort of the kind of the angrier kind of, sort of small little folk kind of things. But he didn't go into any level of detail. Now, we'd had discussions about sort of the little people, the leprechauns, and it's interestingly, in the conversations with the likes of James Tunney, we also discussed how Michael Desarian's sort of research work had highlighted that there was the little folk, there was carvings of the little folk over in South America, and it was exactly the same legends, but literally it was leprechauns, but in summer dress, So, but the carvings are, thousands of years old, but literally it's like if you give them a shillelagh, a top hat and a green suit, there's our leprechauns, sort of, I mean, there's so much more that we kind of need to learn. Like, we're talking about the hollow places and the sacredness, and it also connects back to people connecting to the likes of Agartha as well. There's so much complexity and richness in the likes of this, and it all kind of, in a convoluted kind of a way, it seems to be connected.
Yes.